Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call the honourable member Ian Lees-Galloway.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it gives me some pleasure to follow my friend from the Manawatu, Ian McKelvey, although I must admit I was out of my seat a little bit earlier than I expected. I thought he might take a little bit more of his call time, but it was a good first offering on a piece of legislation in the House. I congratulate Mr McKelvey on that. Mr Speaker, as my colleagues from the Labour Party have already made clear to the House, we are opposing this bill, but that opposition is based firmly on the fact that there is one aspect of this bill in particular that facilitates the operation of private prisons, and it is that aspect of the bill that leads us to oppose it, because we are fundamentally opposed to the concept of privatised prisons. We believe that incarceration is absolutely a role of the state. Here in Parliament, we are a function of the state. We make the laws. The police enforce those laws. The courts determine whether people are guilty or not. All of those are functions of the state. The next function of incarceration, if that is what happens to a person who has been through everything else, should also be a role of the state. It's quite inappropriate that we should be calling on the private sector to have that function of incarceration. We wouldn't offer that ability to anybody else privately. That is absolutely a role of the state, and it is for that reason that we are opposed to this bill, which is somewhat unfortunate because there are other aspects of the bill that we're not over the moon about, but we're certainly interested in seeing what debate occurs at Select Committee, what submissions are made to Select Committee on some of the other provisions of the bill. And our members on the Select Committee, unfortunately I'm unlikely to be one of those, but our members on the Law and Order Select Committee will be looking very closely at all the aspects of this bill. Obviously there are some provisions that we absolutely cannot support, but there are some that we want to look into in a bit more depth. I'm particularly interested in the provisions that change the structure of healthcare within prisons. I know that I heard what David Clendon said from the Greens, and like I said, we're not saying this evening that we're wholeheartedly in support of these changes, but we are interested to see what the impact of them will be, what the implications are. Obviously what the bill does is to remove the requirement for a medical officer. In fact, that removes oversight from a medical officer and puts it in the hands of the health centre manager for a prison, and that health centre manager may be a medical officer, it may be a nurse. I'm not opposed at all to the idea of using a broader workforce in healthcare, whether it be in prisons or anywhere else for that matter. But I do share the concerns that this may be a clever way of reducing the health care that's available for prisoners. It's probably more driven by a desire to reduce costs than anything else. And so we're mindful of the fact that it could reduce health care, but we're also open to the idea that it could have very good results. It certainly probably more closely reflects the actual practice that is occurring in prisons at the moment, and it could be a good innovation that improves health care for prisoners. If that is the case, then we will be happy to support it, but we would like to hear all the arguments from different sides at Select Committee before we take a firm view on that. Obviously, we do have the... well, Mr Guy says we should vote for it then. I've clearly outlined why we can't possibly vote for this bill. There is one provision that we absolutely, on principle, cannot support, but we're quite confident that the government will be able to progress this to Select Committee, and we'll be looking forward to participating in it at that point. What I was going to say before I was interrupted by Mr Guy is that the Ombudsman's investigation of the Department of Corrections actually explicitly said that health services should come under the purview of the health service rather than corrections service, and obviously that is also where some of the concern about the provisions in this bill draw from. But we want to hear the debate. We want to see what people have to say about it. Another provision in here which is obviously going to be positive as far as corrections officers are concerned is the increased powers to search prisoners, and also changing the threshold upon which drug testing can occur. There are obvious positives for that in terms of prison staff security, being able to locate contraband, being able to test prisoners who they suspect to be under the influence of drugs or alcohol. One of the interesting things, and Mr McKelvey might want to look into this because there's some stories that I'm hearing coming out of Linton Prison. They need to be, I need to ascertain whether or not these are facts, but there's some issues coming out, and this comes out from the smoking ban in prisons. Obviously, from point of view of someone who wants to see the harm caused by tobacco reduced, I'm interested to see how that's working out. But with tobacco now becoming contraband, there is a considerable black market in tobacco in many prisons, and I'm hearing a lot of stories coming out of Linton Prison about not only the black market that exists, but the standover tactics that are being used by some prisoners over others to get not only tobacco products, but here's the interesting thing, nicotine replacement therapy products as well are becoming part of this black market. I'm told that a nicotine patch can be worth up to $50, in fact, in the prisons. So maybe that is something that these extra search powers will discover. Nicotine replacement patches being sneaked in and out and around the prison, and certainly tobacco. There's no doubt that tobacco is being smuggled into the prisons and is providing a lucrative black market within the prisons. So that might be something else that the provisions in this bill allow for easier identification of some of that contraband material that is moving around the prisons. Mr. Speaker, I just want to finally come back to this issue of the privatisation of prisons and the provisions that this bill gives to, I suppose, devolve what are really state functions to the private sector. As I said, Labor does not believe that state responsibilities, and incarceration is absolutely a state responsibility, should be discharged by anybody other than the Chief Executive of the Department and his staff. It shouldn't be delegated out to private contractors and their staff operating private prisons. This is especially the case when it comes to functions such as deciding the security classifications of inmates, the temporary removal or release of prisoners, and of release of inmates from prisons. Provisions that expressly allow generally for the delegation of powers and functions of the Chief Executive to contractors and employees of contractors, these are the things that are particularly concerning to us. There is very little evidence that private prisons are the most cost-effective means for taxpayers to get the most out of their prison services, and this reflects, I suppose, what is really an ideological decision from the National Party more than a really practical, pragmatic decision about how it is best to deliver prison services in New Zealand. So, Mr. Speaker, with those concerns noted, and the interest in some of the other provisions that we'll be looking at Select Committee, I reiterate Labor's opposition to this bill on the grounds that we've outlined, but we do look forward to seeing the results of the Select Committee process.
I reckon